On Sunday, Chinese ruler Xi Jinping addressed 170,000 of his officials and military officers about the coronavirus outbreak. And he said that the epidemic exposed the quote-unquote obvious shortcomings of the Communist Party's style of governance. Well, of course, that's an understatement. And it's also the closest that you'll ever get to having a communist leader admit error. And this is going to be, I think, one of the critical elements as we look at China going forward. There is, of course, a lot of error to admit. The first symptoms of coronavirus showed up on December 1 in China. The first case was diagnosed December 8th. There was a low-key public announcement on December 31st, but the real public acknowledgement, the first public acknowledgement of the epidemic was on January 20th, when Xi imposed some draconian measures. And now China is in mortal danger. So for instance, the economy in China is contracting. Oil demand is down 20% year on year. Car sales, for the first 16 days of this month, they were down 92% over the same period last year. Only about a third of Chinese workers have gone back to their job sites, and events all across China have been canceled or postponed, including, for instance, the Canton Fair. That is the big and premier trade fair in China. It is scheduled for April, and now it is postponed. A contracting economy, of course, is an existential threat to a regime that depends upon the continual delivery of prosperity as the primary basis of its legitimacy. And at the same time, the Chinese people are white-hot angry. A tipping point occurred on February 7th of this month, when a doctor in Wuhan, Li Wenliang, died. He was one of the Wuhan eight doctors who tried to warn his city and the rest of China about this pneumonia-like epidemic. And since that time, the Chinese people have understood the dimension of what's going on. The hashtag was, "We want the right of free speech." Also, the Chinese people, like the people in Hong Kong, have adopted, "Do you hear the people sing?" That is that politically charged anthem from Les Miserables. Also at about the same time, you had leaders in Beijing, in the academic community, start to talk out loud about all of these issues. So for instance, you had one professor at Tsinghua University call Xi Jinping, quote, "not very smart," and he demanded that Xi step down. This was at the same time as you had a number of academics write an open letter to the National People's Congress, and that letter was entitled, "The Right of Free Speech Starts Today." I think that what we are seeing is essentially the Chinese people understand that the disease, of course, is coronavirus, but the real disease is communism. Amen. Now, the boldness of these recent developments suggests that the Chinese people are, for the first time in 2 decades, 3 decades, are starting to lose their fear, not only of Xi Jinping, but the Communist Party itself. And then the question becomes, well, why are we concerned about all of this? I think there are 2 reasons to focus on. First of all, beginning on February 5, we have seen both the Communist Party and the Chinese Foreign Ministry lay the groundwork for blaming the United States for the spread of coronavirus in China. And that was especially evident just a few hours ago when Dr. Zhong Nangshan, who was the hero of the SARS epidemic in 2002 and 2003, actually said, well, yes, the first diagnosed case of coronavirus was in China, but the origin was not in China. That is tapping in and laying the theoretical foundation for the notion that the United States deliberately spread this disease in their country. Yeah, it's ludicrous. Yeah, it's groundless and totally irresponsible and dangerous. But the point is that this ludicrous and dangerous charge is basically telling us that Xi Jinping is going to lash out at the United States. Second reason is related. Desperate men do desperate things. And I think Xi Jinping is starting to show desperation. And there are a number of symptoms of this, but clearly lashing out at the US is one of them. Also, we see extraordinary information control in China right now, which is an indication that the Communist Party knows that it has a lot to hide. We've got to remember that Xi's hero is Mao Zedong, someone who was also capable of doing anything. Even in the best of times, the relations between China and the United States are fraught with tension. So, for instance, in May of last year, People's Daily, the most authoritative publication in China, ran a piece that declared a quote-unquote people's war on the United States. Also in May, Chinese propaganda was laying the idea that China had the right to use force to settle the trade dispute. Now, in 2018, the Chinese used a ground-based laser. They temporarily blinded 2 American pilots of a C-130, an American cargo plane, over Djibouti. And also, within days of that, they started sonic attacks against our diplomats at the Guangzhou consulate in China, causing brain injuries. So we have to ask ourselves one very simple question. Why do we maintain a cordial relationship with a regime that is harming Americans? Just about everything is on the line here. This is where we write our history, not just for this decade, but for decades to come. Let me close with just one thought. On Monday, the Communist Party ran a piece which said that the People's Liberation Army of China, over the next 2 years, was going to procure 1.4 million units of body armor. And they said the purpose for the body armor was so that China could deal with Taiwan secessionists and Americans. Xi Jinping is warning us about what he wants to do. We Americans have always been very good at ignoring what our enemies are saying about us. So now we can be taken by surprise. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a war, and the enemy is the People's Republic of China. Thank you.